The remnants of a continent's broken land. The North Frisian Islands are suspended between the sky and the sea. Here, the land gives the illusion that it is the end of the world. Only homes with thatched roofs, built on dirt mounds, break the monotony of the flat ground, weathered by the wind. The wind has imposed silence. For almost 300 years, people have sought this stillness, despite the risk of being submerged by the sea. We are in Germany, near a cluster of small, isolated islands in the North Sea, on the border of Denmark. This region is composed of 14 islands, 4 of them protected by a dike. The 10 smaller islands, called the Halligen, which are raised lands, are not protected by a dike. Pieces of land where 1, 2, sometimes up to 10 houses seem to have sprouted up like mushrooms. Pelvorm, one of 4 islands, has a dam that sits 8 meters high, a giant wall against the sea. 1,000 people live here, mainly farmers and cattle breeders. Right now, the inhabitants have a reprieve, but in the next few decades, the islands in the North Frisian will no longer exist. Heinz Clausen, the former mayor, is one of the historians of Pelvorm. He has lived through many storms, and since his childhood, has kept a collection of archives that show the different catastrophes his family has endured.
If Pelvorm Island did not have a dike, we would be below sea level twice a day. Actually, we would be under the normal sea level by at least 1 meter, meaning that without the barrier, this land would be erased, just as it happened once before.
The North Sea has always been erratic. For months, it's just like a lake. But between 3 to 40 times a year, it swells and becomes ferocious. When a strong wind blows in from the west, huge waves push the ocean over the land, flooding the ports, roads, meadows, and houses. The island is invaded by the sea. It is not a new phenomenon. These storms have been molding the land for centuries.
What we know is that in 1362 there was a dramatic event. A sort of tidal wave engulfed the Utland. Utland is a word that means the land that borders the continent. Therefore, what was firm land accessible to the continent before 1362 became impossible to access once it was submerged.
Thus, the German coast was transformed forever, and the North Frisian Islands were born. These are just piles of peat and mud ripped from the German continent during the tidal wave of 1362. Some farmers decided that the land that was not destroyed by the devastating tidal wave was unsinkable, and so they settled there. It is a unique phenomenon of nature to see these islands remodeled under the eye of a storm. Some have disappeared, while others have moved and new ones have appeared. These islands do not have a definite form. For the residents, dealing with the storm is to be expected. They make do. People are reassured when the water level is not too high. But what do you do when the threat is insidious, almost invisible? What concerns the people of Pelworm more than the storms is the rising of the water caused by global warming. An increase in water level is not enough to cause a mass exodus, but has become a large enough issue to worry Heinz Clausen. He meets the current mayor to discuss the topic.
How are you, Heinz?
I wanted to see if we could discuss this.
Ach so.
I want to talk about the evacuation plan of the island.
Is that the more recent one?
It's the one that we established a few years ago.
Is there anything that still needs to be verified?
It rests heavily on my heart that newcomers to the island do not know the plan. They buy their houses without the sellers informing them of the dangers, or the homes are being rented out and the information is not being passed along. Where should they go to for refuge in case of flooding? Here we have three categories: those who can stay at their place, those who can take in refugees, and those that should flee. Myself, my wife, and our guests, in case the waters start to rise, we know that we can come and stay with you. And I hope that we will be welcome.
Yes, of course.
But is this threat of rising waters in Germany a substantial one? Hamburg is the world's capital in global warming research. The Meteorological University is home to the ultra-powerful computer, the Planet Simulator. It is capable of integrating all the international weather data and to model the rising of the water. Researcher Detlef Stammer is focusing on the problem of the North Frisia.
The direct consequence of global warming is the increasing temperature of the sea. Thus, the water expands and raises the water level of the oceans. Furthermore, we need to know that if all the ice of Greenland melts, the water level will rise by 6 meters. It is likely that over the next 100 years, the level will go up by 40 to 50 centimeters in the Bay of Germany. And that is something that the Halogen Islands need to deal with so that they are not submerged, so that the coastal protection is sufficient.
Viel schlimmer sehe ich, aber viel ernster sehe ich gerade bei der Frage der Zukunft der Halligen.
But what is worse and more serious is the way that the height of the tidal wave will rise with the water level. It's an open-ended question. We have gathered evidence that show us that the height of the tidal waves will increase with the sea level around 50 centimeters to 1 meter, and that could be serious in the next 50 to 100 years.
Indeed, the number of times that the sea has risen higher than 4 meters above normal levels is becoming more frequent. Large storms once arrived about every century, but they have increased over the course of the last 50 years. Heinz Clausen and his wife know that the island's security is almost non-existent. In Pelworm, the breakwall has to hold on, no matter what.
In the past, I was a volunteer fireman. Once the alarm rang, all of a sudden. When I went out, I told myself, this is strange, the wind is blowing really strong. We used to have a wooden door. I opened it, I switched on the light, and I saw that the roof to the barn had flown off.
This dam and the people of Pelworm have a long history with the sea. The elders know that the waves can destroy the wall. That is what happened in the storm of 1962. The salt water invaded the fields and destroyed everything in its path. The sea level was 4.55 meters above the normal level. It had been 150 years since that last happened. People were caught unaware. They had ignored the fact that the storms would hit, unlike today, where it occurs now about every 10 years. In 1962, the damage was devastating. Many people drowned, and the landscape was devastated. The German government decided to undertake major work. First, they had to remove the tons of mud washed in by the tide. A Herculean feat that was necessitated by mechanical means and by the army. It was after that storm that the dike was built to its current form.
At that time, the houses were not too solid. The mounds were not too high, and so, after that tide, we rebuilt them. The new houses were built, and they were put on higher ground. And it was at that point that we built the levees in certain areas so that the sea would not go beyond that point.
A major undertaking had commenced. The government took action. Thanks to enormous subsidies, workers were brought from the continent to the island to raise the dikes. This work of reinforcing the structure would continue for about 25 years. But in 1986, this area was suddenly labeled a national park. Therefore, the subsidies stopped.
The people from the national parks have a strange mentality. Their idea is to let nature advance itself, to let it grow without any intervention. We say that it would be better to let the farming reduce gradually, slowly decline, to finally get it to zero. The people's reaction, and all of ours, is that we are scared for our freedom. The Frisians, the people who live here, have a very deep sense of freedom. They have always felt beaten by authority. For example, the King of Denmark, with each throne change, would confirm the Frisians' privileges regarding freedom. And that was always offset with a sum of money. The Frisians should still be able to buy a little bit of freedom. And as we did not have any involvement in this legislation regarding the national park, we were furious. It was decided without even consulting us, and we resented it, and we felt that they were trying to take a piece of our freedom.
The people realized, a little late, that the classification of the national park marked the beginnings of being abandoned. With global warming and the inevitable rising of water levels, the government had ceased the protective funding and had given the island back to nature. Although the national park concerns only the sea surrounding the islands, it has also imposed a reduction in farming and fishing. As half of the people are retired, there has not been a large reaction. But the residents have not yet said their last words. Even though the subsidies have ended, the work around the dike continues, although with less intensity than in the past. Knud Knudsen is in charge of some of the men who work for the state at the dike in Pelvorm. All year round, even when it's minus 10 degrees, he goes barefoot and only wears his boots to protect his feet from twigs.
Money is always a problem. Right now we don't have enough workers who can do this type of labor. I've been working here since 1975, and I remember at the beginning there were 50 to 60 workers. Now in 2011, we are no more than 12. We need to hire people from the continent who could work and live here, and that is a problem that is not easy to resolve. The problem is that today, we have to save everywhere, and we're considering that it's not a necessity to continue to do the work here. It's a shame because I think that if we don't continue to work here, the island will one day disappear, totally.
By classifying the region as a national park, the government wanted to provide a place for migrating birds. Birds may be the next habitants of Pellworm. Therefore, with little means, a decision must be made. Either elevate the large dike or construct barriers that hinder the tides.
The first thing we do when we need to reclaim the land from the sea is to place barriers of branches along the edge. They're placed at right angles to the coast, every 200 meters, to hold the current away from the land. To maintain this barrier, we plant 5 stakes per meter. We insert bundles of twigs that we tie with wire, which we call a sew, so that it's not taken to sea by the tides. Then, we dig through the trenches. Today, they're done with a backhoe. The marine sediments settle in, and every 5 years we empty it, gather the sediments, and drop them in the middle of the fields. Little by little, we gain some more land.
Thanks to this procedure, which is still done today, Pellworm has grown by a few hectares. This lagoon, exposed at low tide, is called a wat. Helmut Bonson knows the exact amount of bundle barriers there are for security of the island. He has traveled thousands of kilometers around Pellworm to find remains for his museum. These barrier remainders are more than 7 centuries old. These bundles of softwood, when combined with the salt water, cause a chemical reaction within the wood which render it almost indestructible.
It was here that the first barrier was built by the people of Pellworm after the first tidal wave of 1362. But in 1485 there was another tsunami. It smashed and destroyed everything. So for the last 50 years, the Wat has rebuilt all the land that is in front of me. It is clear that the water rises because of global warming. But the island will not disappear all of a sudden. I think we can still live here for another 100 to 150 years, but at that point it would become difficult. Some people say that we should raise the dikes, but the solution would be to expand it so that the waves go over it, slowly, until it breaks, so that everything that passes over the dike gets discharged through the locks. But if the dikes are raised, they risk being too heavy, and with the water pressure, it would collapse.
Experts on the mainland have contradictory beliefs. They think that work should be done only on the large dam. Testing has been done to see how many meters the dike should be raised, and the work is scheduled to be completed in a few years.
It is not a solution to continuously raise the dikes. It won't work. There will come a day when the base of the wall will no longer be able to hold the weight of the additions. We must consider different alternatives and Fortland. This advancement on the sea is a good solution. With these bundled dams, we can better protect the coast than with a breakwall 20 meters high.
Will the dike hold up to the next storm like it has in the past? No one knows. For the people who are worried, there is one solution. Consolidate the mounds on which their houses are built. Since it is illegal to take the soil off the land, they have to buy and import it at their own cost from the mainland. Once this region became a national park, many constraints were imposed on the residents in terms of energy consumption. Instead of viewing it as a handicap, they have reacted positively and have turned towards clean energy sources.
In the past, we were paying a lot of money for energy that was brought in from the mainland. We were always dependent on gas, and now it has become so much simpler. It's the opposite. It is very surprising. Pellworm has become an example of a self-sufficient community in energy.
Today at Pellworm, thatched roofs and renewable energy unite in the same place. The objective is to be autonomous and at no cost to the government. Each farm has invested in solar panels, and the people have come together to take part in wind farms.
In Pellworm, we use all forms of renewable energy. What we have here is a cocktail of biogas, solar, and wind energy. What you see behind me is the solar power station. In Pellworm, we produce double the energy that we consume. I think that we need to accept that climate changes are coming and that they may be rapid. It has happened in the past, where changes happen in short periods. Even if it is not noticeable to the world at large, there is a necessity to adapt. But when it comes to energy supply, the infrastructure and attitude changes take a long time. That means that we should make these changes now, so that our children and grandchildren can enjoy it.
The people understand that it is necessary to adapt and to throw less carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Faced with the menace of rising water, they have, more than any other country, the need to set an example. After becoming self-sufficient in energy, people's activities changed. Historically, most of the people were farmers. However, the government no longer financed this profession. The Nomsen family have been farmers for 4 generations. Nico and his wife Anna have 3 children. Nico looks after 90 cows by himself. His father helps him a little, but the problem is labor. Living on an island, surrounded by a sea which everyone knows is rising, does not entice young laborers. Nico, the owner of his land, is not afraid of floods, but he criticizes the removal of government subsidies for farming.
No, I'm not scared. After all, when will this large tidal wave come? Will it be tomorrow or in 4 to 5 generations? No one knows. I think we should be positive. We still want to invest, give a future to the next generations. If we don't give the next generation a future, at that point, it's not the fear of the water that will be the problem. It's the unemployment or lack of opportunities. I see that problem far outweighing the water issue.
Living isolated from the mainland has a cost, especially for delivering his milk. Nico depends on a truck that must take the ferry, the only means of transportation to the farmland. Each trip adds additional expenses that do not encourage young families to settle in Pellworm. Outside of farming, there are no other professions on the island. A veterinarian is the only person to settle permanently in Pellworm. One of Nico's cows has given birth, and she can no longer stand up.
She must have a serious problem, or she would not have stayed down like that for so long.
Yes, I thought of that too.
A bit of calcium should help. I hope to see you later then.
It would be better if you didn't.
Right, bye.
Despite the lack of farming help, Nico has some good reasons to appreciate the life on Pellworm.
Yes, I'm happy at Pellworm. It's a fantastic life here. What makes me happy here is the family life, with farming and the solidarity of people. Children, they can't be any happier than here on the farm. We live for farming here, and a little bit of tourism. We have 3 houses that we can rent out and 4 apartments that are equipped to run on solar energy.
Today, the national park is a tourist attraction, and the residents have decided to take advantage of it. The hotel industry has become profitable and represents more than half of the annual income.
Today I'm going to suggest a delicious goulash, served with noodles, red cabbage, and salad. And for dessert, we have white cheese with raspberries.
In the Pellworm Lighthouse, more than 400 weddings are celebrated each year. The lack of space does not allow for large receptions. Instead, people come for the ambiance.
It was my dream. It's simply the North Sea. It's the Nordic side. It's the wind, it's the cold, it's fantastic. It's the North Sea.
These birds were originally perceived as a nuisance. Today, they represent a bonanza for the tourism industry. Tourists flock to the island in small groups. This delights curator Helmut Bonson, who has stored in his museum almost 1 million pieces of history, from prehistoric times to the past century. In Pellworm, turning a handicap to an advantage is a habit. The people adapt. Before the tidal wave of 1362, certain people lived here. The storms destroyed homes, dikes, and mounds. Far away, hidden, are the remains which represent the memories of those who did not survive.
There were mounds. There was a house, and there was another one. Here was the cellar. Actually, it was a simple hole in the ground to keep the food cold, so we could say that it was a cellar. This round thing, it was a well for their drinking water system. Rainwater was collected because there was not water underground. We could live only on rainwater as the water surrounding us was simply too salty.
Twice a day, at low tide, the Watt empties entirely. When it leaves, the remains left within reappear, still preserved after 7 centuries.
The highlight of the area is the calm. It's one of the reasons why we have so many tourists here. They do not come in masses, they come solely for the peace. There were even some people who came here and could not sleep because it was too quiet. They had always lived in noisy places and they found it distressing. But for us, we savor the silence.
the 8 fishermen on the island, the same shift towards tourism is also taking place. It has been 20 years since the marine life massively disappeared because of industrial fishing, and the local fishermen are struggling to make a living. The unexpected effects of global warming only make it worse.
What is frustrating, in the summertime especially, is that we no longer find the fish that we used to have. There are some new ones, but not many. They come from the Mediterranean, and even further south. The sardines, for example, they are new, and we sometimes find them in the net.
The sandbanks that emerge because of the Wat serve as a refuge to the seals. Since the area has become a national park, they are protected. Andreas, a fisherman, has become certified to be a guide. He has the right to bring the tourists to see the seals. It is another way to bring in some money, as fishing no longer has a future.
In one human lifespan, we cannot realize the impact of global warming. Certain people, who are around 80 years old, can say that 60 years ago, the water level reached a certain level. So now, 60 years later, it is about 20 centimeters higher. There is an old bridge in Coog that has been around for over 60 years. It was always visible when the tide was high, but now, during a normal tide, the bridge is totally submerged underwater. These are small things that we can attribute to global warming, but on a human scale, it's hard to say.
New species of fish have appeared. The herring and cod that used to be here have now migrated north to colder waters. The seals should be avoided and not scared off. They are reserved for tourism purposes. Business is not easy for the fishermen. When they are not acting as tour guides, they have no choice but to fish for shrimp. Being classified as a national park has prompted the people to embrace clean energy tourism. But it is strange that they did not get any grants for protecting the coast. The reasoning could be the lack of communication between the people of these islands, who seem to have forgotten that there is strength in numbers. Despite all their efforts to adapt, they risk being the first climate refugees of Europe.
The islands, like all the Halogen, are uniquely linked to the mainland. We get what is needed and sell what is needed to be sold. It is linked to the continent. Therefore, we communicate very little with each other.
Each piece of land, working exclusively for the mainland, reinforces its isolation. Knud, on top of his work on the dikes, is also a very special postman. 3 times a week, Knud brings the mail to the people of the Halogen, who are not accessible by boat. At low tide, the sea withdraws. The only thing remaining is the Wat, and walking becomes the only mode of transportation.
Here you can see the whole of the Halogen and its islands. And if you wanted to go there, it would take a long time. To go to Amrum, which is right behind the Hoog, it would take just as much time to fly from Hamburg to New York. It is almost that, so if we want to go there, it would take us about 6 hours.
Not far from Pellworm is another small island, also dealing with global warming. People there live with the rising water differently. Here, a track seems to be swallowed on the horizon. At the end lies the island of Nord-Strandismoor. There are 4 houses, 3 families, and the sea surrounding them. Ruth's ancestors settled on these lands about 300 years ago. She lives here with her children, who she raises alone since her husband left her. The only way to reach her is by rail on a small diesel-operated train called the Lore. Ruth is a farmer. Her oldest son is 23 years old, and he lives in the house next door. He helps her take care of the land. Many canals exist in Nord-Strandismoor. It is what makes this place unique. Here, there is no dike like in Pellworm, and they do not fight against the sea. They use it.
All of these trenches that cross our field are there so that the island will drain after each flood. Each trench has a meaning. When we look at it from here, it looks absurd. But each trench runs into another, which then runs into a lock. The surplus then runs into the North Sea. It's a drainage system in which the trenches are deeply intertwined, so that the water runs slowly and so that we do not have erosion in the fields. No withdrawals. The islands grow with each flooding. We are very proud. When we have floods, we raise our land about 1 to 2 millimeters per year. That is why we wish that the land would rise faster than the level of seawater.
It is bold of them to use the flooding and the sediment deposits to raise the land. But this system is not enough in cases of strong storms. Several times a year, the sea rises quickly, invading the island to the point where it separates the 4 houses. It has been more than 30 years since the government financed major work to be done to protect the houses.
We protect ourselves from the storms by putting shutters on all our lower floor windows so that the water would not break them. But if everything gets damaged and taken away, at that moment we can climb to the first floor to our bunker. It is built on 4 concrete and steel pillars. Even the walls are built that way. And so that should resist the storm should everything else tumble. Actually, we no longer receive subsidies to protect our house. No company will insure us. We've tried, but we live in a dangerous area. The tsunami risks are not covered. The only thing I have left is to hope that the storm will not destroy my house, as I will not have the money to rebuild it. Our house is built on a mound that we keep in good condition, and we hope that the houses can be rebuilt in the near future, and that the coast protection will give us security.
All the sheep are new, and so they have to be taught where to go in case of rising waters. It is the children's responsibility to train them, and it's not an easy feat.
We have just returned the sheep to the pen, and we are training them every night so that it becomes instinctual. Then we count them to make sure that one of the sheep did not fall into the ditch. We do this for a week or two, and then they instinctively know where to go. We push the sheep in the pen if the weather is bad, whether it is a bad storm or if the seawater is rising. We lock them up in there, and if the water rises very high, then they will naturally go towards the hump.
The island of Nordstrandismoor is a paradise for birds. In March, they come in waves, arriving by the thousands. The Halligen is a resting place for the migrators that feed before going towards Scandinavia. The priority of the German government is to guarantee the peace of the birds. Every 15 days, an ornithologist comes to count the birds.
Global warming starts at the beginning of the food chain, in the Watt, as there are certain fish and crustaceans that have migrated towards the north. Fish has been bird food for centuries. The Watt is the most important place for the migrating birds, as they come here to fill their stomachs. In the Nordstrandismoor, we can see the birds that migrate here and who reproduce while the tide is high, such as the geese. On the other hand, farmers are not too happy, as there are droppings everywhere, and the geese are in competition for the grass with the sheep, since that is what they also eat. In the future, the birds may not rest here as often, as their food is slowly disappearing. We fear that there will be less and less birds that arrive here to continue their flight.
The irony of it is that the moment we give the birds a place, their population has already begun to decline.
Da rein? Und du machst die fest reindrücken. Und so. Und weiter?
Since her husband's departure to the mainland, Ruth has seen her revenues decline. Other than the tourists that she receives between April and October, she has no other income. Therefore, against National Park recommendations, she will buy 80 sheep that Nomen and Henrik will bring from the mainland. To complete this transaction, they have only the rail and the lore, and they hope that they do not need to change the route.
If we had a road, it would be simpler to bring the sheep home. With one phone call, we could have brought in some trucks, but a road has too many disadvantages. The people of Halligen at the turn of the century decided to have a track and a lore because they were scared of the repercussions a road would make. They were nervous. They were scared that they would be invaded by a mass of tourists, so they preferred the lore, as it is impossible to come here any other way. The lore is the only way.
The direct consequence of this decision is that any movement here is an adventure. It took Nomen and Henrik 4 trips and 5 hours to bring home the 80 sheep. In Nordstrandismoor, freedom is paid in hours.
Here, in the Halligen, work is divided in two. The men are in charge of farming, and the women are in charge of housework, the children, and any touristic activity. The men also work for the coastal protection. That allows the families to get fixed income. This is how we traditionally have lived in the Halligen.
The laying of new rails, as the old ones are corroded, is also part of the coastal protection work.
Depending on the season, we do different work to protect the coast. In summer, we're in the Watt, reinforcing the barrier bundles. We can't do that in winter as it's too cold. In winter, which is longer, we replace the rails of the Lohr. We are paid for the work of securing the area. The protection of the coast is a state affair here. At the moment, there are 4 of us. There's only 1 man in every family in Halligen that can work because we wouldn't be able to manage otherwise. In general, it's always like this. There's only 1 son in the family that can continue the work. We cannot live in the Halligen. There would not be any room for any more houses. It's a fact.
I am the older one. I can take over the farm in Halligen and also work here.
Every morning until 3 p.m., Noman is busy with the coastal protection work with his 3 neighbors. The rest of the day, if he is not working in the fields, he is building a new Lohr, which will protect them more in storms.
Noman has to take over the farm. He is the firstborn, and because he went to school for this. But how will he one day find a partner? We will see one day. Very little love stories exist in the islands of the Halligen, as it's hard to go from here to, let's say, Pellworm. It's mainly the people from the mainland that come here, and it's important because we do need new blood.
The children also have their own share of work to do. Early morning and at the end of the day, they must feed the animals. In Pellworm, farming was not an issue for the children. Here, in Nordstrandismoor, the departure of their father makes reality more painful. So much so that for the children, the future is uncertain.
Yes, it's always the same question. If my mom leaves the farm, I would take it. I need to learn a profession first, otherwise it would not be possible. Anyhow, in principle, it's my older brother who could get the farm.
And from 8 a.m. to 12:30 p.m., like everywhere in Germany, the children go to school. 3 students to 1 teacher.
Dann Madagaskar. Gut. Und dann hatten wir Tansania. Wo könnte das denn sein?
Tansania ist da bei dem...
Da, ja, richtig.
Nee, das ist Kongo.
When you are a teacher in the Halligen, it is something special. It is a special person who can do it.
Man wird gefragt, es ist immer sehr aufwendig.
That is why we have offered a tenure, and it is, till today, very tough to find someone who meets all the criteria needed. It could take a year to find the right person. We cannot force someone to go to work in Halligen. To be a teacher here is not the same as being a traditional teacher. We teach from kindergarten to grade 3 at the same time to different students. There are hardships, but they are not overwhelming. On the other hand, it is very enriching. I can see as far as I want. In good weather, I can see 50 kilometers in front of me, while others don't see much further than their neighbor's roof.
I can see global warming being very dangerous because of the rising of the sea level.
Und natürlich wissen wir auch nicht, wie welcher dieser ganzen
It is not easy to understand scientific reasoning and how many centimeters the level of seawater will rise.
Seit fast 300 Jahren wohnt unsere Familie hier.
But our family has been here for 300 years, and I hope Noman and his generation can live happily here for a long time, and that this issue can be solved. I remain optimistic. If I was pessimistic, I would leave here, and that is not an option. I want this little piece of land to survive several centuries more, and that we can continue to live here happily.